Welcome to the Private Lenders Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Welcome back to the Private Lenders Podcast. Today's guest is Devon Kennard from 42 Solutions, a private lending company based out of Arizona. I'm going to let Devon do his intro here in a second, but we originally chatted via Instagram a few weeks ago to discuss a few things related to his private lending operation, and we kind of hit it off. Devon was then on our other podcast, Real Estate Investing Podcast, last week. If you're not familiar with that, you can check that out on Hard Money Bankers YouTube. And we learned a lot about his real estate investment portfolio. But today, definitely want to focus on his private lending portfolio that he has grown here in the last year or so and discuss, his experience on the lending side. He also has a new book called Real Estate Side Hustle. I'm sure we're going to get into as well. Devon, thanks for joining Private Lenders Podcast. Maybe let's just start off with just a quick intro about who you are and how you got started.
What's up, guys? My name is Devon Kennard. I just retired from the NFL last year and at the beginning of 2023. I've been investing in real estate for the last 10 years. As soon as I got out into the NFL after my rookie season, I bought my first property. I've been private lending for about 4 years, but I actually started my company last year. So it's been just about a year come this October. So that's been awesome. And yeah, I really love this side of the business. And it was kind of perfect timing because I kind of separate things from fast money and slow money. And football was my fast money for almost a decade. And I was trying to transition into what my fast money was going to be once I retired. And this private lending made a lot of sense for me. And the transition's been really impactful so far.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's been your biggest challenge so far as a hard money lender or private lender?
There's a lot of different ways you can structure your business. So I kind of dived in. Like I didn't know about you guys at Hard Money Bankers at first. So my first introduction into the right structure of building a business was Beth Johnson and Lynn to Live out of Seattle. There's Bigger Pockets book. So I read that. It gave me a good kind of infrastructure and the idea of like, okay, this is how you systemize the business. And I started that, was consuming a lot of content on private credit, private debt, how to do this, and just been growing in the space a lot over the last year. And I would say today, the biggest challenge for me is I'm really in the trenches of setting up my SOPs for the business, the operation side, exactly what my criteria is, what's the process, because for a while there, every loan felt a little different because I was like kind of figuring out what I wanted to do, listening to a lot of different voices. And now I feel like I'm to the point where I have a good idea of what I want to do, pulling, stuff from you guys, stuff from other people I've learned, and honing in on that. So that's been kind of my progression.
Yeah, it's crazy because, if you talk to a dozen private lenders or hard money lenders, we can use that term interchangeables, I guess, but everyone is just set up differently, and there's no right or wrong. I mean, maybe there's a wrong, but there's no right. Everyone's different of what they want to do. Some people have more capital than deals. Some people have more deals than capital. Some people want to be local. Some people want to be nationwide. So it's kind of, it's funny to just hear how lenders are originally set up and why it's set up like this. And, even us, like we have old habits that aren't necessarily good or bad habits. And it's just like, we just do it that way, because that's just the way that we do it, right? Like I'll give you an example. We collect construction draw fees for inspections on the front end. They're not rolled into the draw. And now some people might do this, some people might not do it. We've just always done that way, and we've charged that amount of how many draws up front, and it gets paid on the front end. And I know some people take it out on the back end. That's just how we do things. So again, there's no right or wrong. Was there anything that, as you kind of got started, that was just easier than you originally expected?
I would say people overemphasize the servicing aspect and learning about the industry a lot. Like there's third party servicing you could hire, and I was considering that for a while. But with the software companies that are out now, it is not all that daunting as people make it seem. I wouldn't be surprised if more smaller hard money and private money companies start to service their own stuff more and more, because I use baseline software, and I can pull funds in a couple of clicks. So I'm like, well, why would I hire third party, lose control? So that was a surprise to me, in that I thought like, oh, to do it right, I need a servicing company and all that. And I have changed my perspective on that. I think that should be in-house, and there's the right companies and right software backing servicing that can help you do that expeditiously and still keep track of things really well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, if you're newer to the lending space in general, like this business has evolved a lot over the last 10 years or so. Like when we started in 2007, really the only servicing company was the mortgage office back then. And they were the big one. They'd been around for a long period of time, and they weren't affordable for us. And, they're not affordable, I think for some private lenders as well as they're starting out. And, we band-aided spreadsheets and then, a server-based software that was crappy until we got to that point. So point being is stuff's evolving, and, that's a good thing, when companies put money into an industry. So where are you finding your leads? Are you doing mostly local stuff? Are you doing kind of stuff all over the country?
Yeah. So my strategy when I first got into the business was more so like, I have relationships with really good operators across the country. I'm going to specialize in identifying them, understanding their business model, their structure, and lending to them. So I was lending in multiple different markets. And honestly, you guys, and listening to every single one of your episodes, I literally listen to every one. You guys have shifted my mindset on that a lot. And now that I've retired, I'm more local in Arizona. My wife's an agent. I invest myself, so I have contractors here locally. It's a non-judicial foreclosure state, so the foreclosure process is easier. So there's just a lot of things that make lending in Arizona really beneficial to me. So I've kind of pivoted, and I'm going to shift my business to where that's where I'm primarily going to lend. And it has to make a lot of sense for me to lend elsewhere moving forward. But that's a shift though, because I originally thought like, hey, I'm going to get the top operators I know. I have a lot of contacts, and I'm going to do it anywhere. And I felt like I had a good idea. So what I would do, people would think that sounds crazy, but my mindset when I was doing that was like, I'm going to make them provide the contracting crews. So I want their A team, B team, and if there is a C team, I want all their contracting crews. I want their real estate agents. I want their title companies, to where if I ever had to take over the property, I have contacts in the city. I've usually visited at least once to the places, get an idea, get a feel for the level of rehabs they do, go tour some of their properties. So I felt I was doing it the right way. And it's not that I never will do that again, but I have too much of a distinct advantage lending in Arizona to not lean into that. So that's kind of my focus now.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I know lenders that lend that nationwide. We've dabbled with doing stuff nationwide, and on a smaller scale, starting out, it's not an awful model, but stuff changes, right? And as you have a big enough portfolio, like you need to have consistency in it, or it's crazy. I mean, I don't know if you were flying out to look at every property, but like, and meeting vendors and stuff, but like that takes time, to do, and money. And as there's just different jurisdictions. Some states have licenses, some have different foreclosure types, some have commercial usury laws. Like it's hard to determine all that stuff, especially on a one-off deal. We kind of were always like, hey, we'd like to stay local, but if we choose, but like we're open to choosing other secondary markets, and if we choose those, like let's do it. Like let's go all in. Let's meet with legal counsel. Let's figure out if there's any lending laws we got to be required to do, because I think that's challenging. It takes a lot of work to do that, right? Unless you're local.
For sure. If you're a small enough shop, I mean, you can. I consider it kind of chasing the operators. Like you can chase the operators into their markets, but the thing is, you could lose a market quickly if they stop coming to you for funding and all of those things, to where, if I'm lending primarily in Arizona, now I can build a good Rolodex here locally. And, one thing that I kind of started to see is you start to have solutions. If one deal starts to go through default and I know other investors, I can be like, hey, I have this deal. Why don't you buy it from them? I'll fund it still, like there's more creativity when you're local and you can have more exit plans when things don't go right. So I like that aspect as well.
You're also in a market that has good price points in general. Obviously this business model works great in median housing price neighborhoods, but there's just certain markets in the country that the median housing price might only be 100 or 180 or $200,000. And, then your average loan's 80, 100, 120 grand. And, you could be in a market where your average loan is 3-4 times X that. And when we make our money on, lending out and it's on interest and fees, you make 3 or 4 times the amount of money doing the same amount of work. And, I've talked to a lot of lenders around the country that are in smaller markets that they know, and, they struggle. Sometimes they struggle because they're like, well, I have to do, 10 loans a month to make payroll and to do this because my loans are so small. And I get it. And that's just part of the business model that in essence you take. It's the same thing with like a real estate agent, right? Like real estate friends of mine that sell real estate in Washington, DC compared to Baltimore, they live 30 minutes apart, but they're make 3, 4, 5X the amount of commissions doing the same amount of work. So
that's a really good point, because I was running the math in Arizona, and my goal is to get my business to where I have 10 to 20 million dollars out at all times on a consistent basis, and at a 400K loan amount, we're really talking about 25 to 50 loans consistently. And there's some properties that are even more than that 400 range. So 25 to 50 loans out at any given time, that's manageable. I feel, and like that perspective gave me a lot of vision on like, okay, I can have less loans out here in Arizona than I would in some of the other markets that I started lending in, where it's like 100 or 200. So that's really appealing for sure.
Yeah, there's a lender in our mastermind group, and he's in a smaller market, and he's been trying to figure out ways to, in essence, get more money on his top end bottom line. And the solution was like, you already have a good book of business here. Like, let's try to focus on a different market and really learn that market, and don't jump in there fast. Start slow, do some deals there, and then diversify the portfolio. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't have there's also something to be said about don't having all your eggs in one basket either, or one market. As market shift. I mean, we've seen markets where, during some of the cycles, some have been very affected while others have not been affected. So, it's good to be open-minded with all that. So I'm assuming, at the moment, are you completely self-funding this, or have you been raising capital?
I have a couple of investors, family and friends. I haven't really turned that faucet all the way up yet because I haven't needed to. I've been really kind of building out the infrastructure and lending my own capital up to this point. But I have, as of today, $3.5 million out on the street, and about 300 of that is investor capital, and the rest is personal capital. And I'm just going to methodically build it out and grow from there.
Yeah, I was going to ask like what you think your game plan would be, like if you try to self-fund as much as this as you can, or bring in friends and family, and obviously help them provide, giving them a good rate of safe return as well, and then you're helping yourself and you're helping other people.
One thing I know you guys talk about a lot is lending your own capital and what that can do for your portfolio and your return. And if I can get to $20 million and it's all my own, I would love that. But realistically, it'll be a blend between my personal capital, line of credit, because I have a portfolio of properties and I could use lines and different things like that, as well as investor capital, because I do want to give people I know an opportunity to be able to invest and get a really solid return. So I think a blend between those three things is gonna get me there and methodically kind of help me build the business. And that's what I'm looking forward to the most, because if I can put more of my own capital in, I could do 10 million instead of 20 million and still hit the income levels that I want. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, have less risk, less headaches. I mean, we've always thought about that as well. Like after, because we've been at this $50 million deployed for a long period of time, and ideally it'd be great if it was mine and Chris's only 50 million, but there's a lot of capital investors that are involved as well. And that one component of having a capital investor is the second half of our business, meaning like there's a lot that goes in that. I mean, we're managing investor capital. There's Chris in essence Like that's his full-time job inside our operation. I'm not, he's not necessarily doing keystrokes, but he's communicating with them, figuring out what investor is going in what deal and things like that. And we've always kind of had an opinion of like, well, when the time comes, you can do half as much business and, make the same amount of money. But there's also something to be said about taking care of capital investors, not just in real time, but in the future of, hey, they've been around with you for such long periods of time and they're used to getting, whatever, 10% rate of return. And you want to take care of them. Like they're happy. Like they've helped you grow this business. I mean, our capital investors have helped us grow this business. Maybe they haven't done the hand holding but they're enabling us to help deploy capital into with their capital. So it's kind of a beautiful thing when everything works out, right? You help real estate investors on the front end make money flipping houses, and you help investors on the back end. So it's,
now, I think that's been my biggest joy in it, is like you're helping a lot of people, solving a personal problem. You're helping the investors build wealth as far as the actual borrowers and who's doing the flips. So you're getting to help them build wealth and for their families. And then the passive investors who are lending through you and working with you as partners, funding these deals, they get a really good return on their money that's collateralized by assets. So I think it's a great balance, and I've been like really enjoying that aspect of thing of like it's really mutually beneficial for everyone involved.
What so what are kind of in your market, what do you think the going terms are, or what are the going terms these days? Like we're 12.993 points, typically a one year loan. Is that similar, lower, higher?
People are getting a little bit lower here. I'm seeing 10 to 12%, but we're talking about from the big Kiavis and stuff. They're here in this market pretty heavily. There's a couple of other big shop private hard money. There's one Capital Fund one. It's a big Arizona one. They're in a couple of different markets. So the terms are a little bit better on the hard money side, but I really pitch what I can provide in the sense of like, I'm here locally. It's my funds. I can fund quickly. So my fees are 12% and 2 points. And then I have a processing fee of $9.95, a draw request. I do it up front, similar to you guys, of $800 up front, and then a doc prep fee of $500. So those are the only, that and the origination of 2 points. Those are like my 4 fees. And I try to make it a really straightforward process. And there's some pushback. All 12's a little high, this and that. One thing I have added is I like the Dutch funding, which is essentially like if the property is 350, I'm funding it, let's call it 80% of the purchase and 100% of the rehab. And, I fund that, but I'm charging on the full rehab amount from day one. There's some, I started out not doing that because in my head, it made sense of like, oh, you should only charge on what you actually send them. But what I realized is I have to keep that money on the sidelines. And now I have the structure where I have like a separate trust account that's just really holding those funds. So that's not completely fair to me because I can't use it for anything else. So so now I do what they call the Dutch funding, and I get some pushback, but I think I'm showing my value. I've funded a deal in 2 days before. My wife's an agent here locally, so she's helping me comp stuff out. I know a contractor who kind of is like my inspector, who would go and kind of give me an idea of if he thinks the budget is right for the project. So I'm able to act really fast.
Yeah. And also, and I agree with that. I don't know any other way to do it. Mostly because again, you can't touch the capital, right? Like it's sitting there allocated for them, go ask. And this is actually an interesting, thing, like go ask a real estate investor that had 20 flips going on. What happened in March, 2020, right when COVID hit, they couldn't get construction draws. Like everything was frozen. People couldn't get construction draws. I don't even know if the money was even available, even if they wanted to. So like, and that didn't last long, right? That lasted 3 weeks before business as usual. Point being is like, be like, I'll tell the borrower and nobody ever asks. But if they did, it's like, I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't set it up like this, because what happens if you came to me and, we were out of business or something and we didn't have the capital, like the capital's got to be available for you. And also, one of the questions I asked the real estate investor up front is, hey, how long is it going to take to get draws and flip the property? And everyone thinks it's going to be significantly quicker than it really is. So then it's like, okay, well, let's do the math on that. The extra $40,000 I'm holding, like it's only going to cost you a few extra $100 in costs anyways. So,
and that's what I tell my borrowers. They have situations where it takes maybe a full 4 business days to get the draws. And now their contractor's a little upset. They've left the job. Maybe they've gone to another one. So, by not being able to pay them quickly enough, or, to not be ahead of the game in that, all of a sudden your project's getting pushed back a week, 2 weeks, that starts to add up. And, that's something, if you give me the information I need, I see the invoices, I see the work being done, I'm going to release those draws as fast as you can provide the information I need.
Yeah. Early on in our 20s, when Chris and I were learning a little bit about this business, and we were talking to a really rich guy who was deploying a lot of money in Baltimore, he was like, listen, if you want to be in this space, there's 2 very important things that you need to understand. You have to close on time. You have to close on the date you're going to tell somebody you're going to close. You can't push back closing. And you have to send wires next day as quick as possible. You can't go a week or 2 weeks to do draws. Like these contractors and these investors, like they need the money to keep these projects afloat and keep them moving, or their contractor is going to go find other work, and then they're not going to get them back on that job. So, it's always been important to us to figure out ways, even when we were just the 2 of us and, in essence, a one-man band, on, hey, you need a draw? Cool. I'll be down there tomorrow. We'll take a look and I'll bring a check with me and we'll give it to you. And then in today's is a little bit more streamlined of cool. We'll send our inspector out there. He'll be out there later today or tomorrow, and we'll make sure the draw gets, and then we'll, he'll hit me up, make sure everything's good, and then we'll send the wire. So I think that's important. If you're a newer lender listening or watching, make sure you can get these draws done as quick as possible. And they don't have to be a day, right? They don't have to be a day. They don't even have to be 2 days, but like as soon as possible. No point to wait. Like, I think that's very, very important. And, on some real estate investors that you're negotiating with on the front end, be like, oh man, 13-3 or 12-2, I can get 10-1. It's like, yeah, but that might be an institutional back lender, right? And yeah, they may be a little bit cheaper, but they're also a nationwide company. They're not gonna be able to do draws quickly. Like, they're not going to come out to the property tomorrow to do your inspection. You're going to have to do a full appraisal, things like that. So like, you learn how to sell against that. And then, then after you explain to them all the benefits of working with you, then you can kind of back into the dollars and cents and say, okay, well, how much are they going to lend? How much am I going to lend? What's it going to cost with you? What's the cost with them? And it's like, listen, it's going to cost $6,000 more to go with me. I get it. $6,000 is a lot of money, but these are the reasons, you're going to be, all the headaches. So you learn that, right? You learn that from talking to borrowers, right? Sorry, I don't know if I'm frozen or you're frozen. If I got bad internet today or you have bad internet today, it might be me. I don't know. Like,
I'm not sure either. You cut out for a second, but I see you now.
Okay, got it. Maybe it's mine. It didn't say I was, but it's all good. All right. One kind of last questions on the private lending stuff, and then I'm going to switch gears just a bit. So right now, I'm guessing it's probably just you as kind of a one-person operation. Mm-hmm. What's your day-to-day look like related to? Because I know a lot of investors at your size portfolio, or real estate or private lenders at your size portfolio, you like talking to borrowers, you like doing, doing that side of it. But like, sometimes you get bogged down with paperwork and processing and ordering title work and things like that. Like, what does your day-to-day look like? And like, what are things that, you're kind of looking to, in essence, hire out kind of as you grow?
Yeah. So right now, my biggest focus is setting up all my procedures on the back end. So I'm getting really familiar with Baseline Software, which is the processing and servicing company and origination company I decided to go with. And I've actually been working hand in hand with their founder in building out my company's SOPs. Like, I'm trying to dial it down to a T of what it is, because I want to be able to plug and play somebody on the back end for a lot of that admin work. But as of now, I'm pretty much every role. I do already have a bookkeeper who helps me with some of, just the bookkeeping side of things and servicing. But for the most part, it's just me, but it's manageable. I have 17 loans right now, $3.5 million out. And, the software is helping me keep track of that really pretty easily. It's been manageable. So I think eventually hiring one person, but if I'm getting to 25 to 50 loans to get to, where I want to, I don't think I'm going to need more than 1 or 2 people. I'm going to have my bookkeeper who can do some of the servicing for me and maybe one other person. But I do want to get to the point where I can focus on marketing and I can controlling the underwriting. I think those are the two biggest things for me. I want to be able to handle all of the underwriting and then the marketing. And then obviously if a deal ever goes bad, I want to be in full control of that. But all the keystrokes in the back end, I hope that's so dialed in to where I could really rely on somebody to kind of plug it in, make sure the bank accounts are matching up with the software system, and I can kind of oversee it and review it and have checks and balances. But I think that would be the perfect business for me.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think a lot of lenders, as they reach not necessarily scale, but as they're growing, they have one person kind of on the back end, one person on the front end, right? Back end person is doing bookkeeping and accounting, making sure they can account for all the money, loan servicing, collecting payments. And then the front end's, processing. And, processing is challenging. It's not the hardest job in the world, but it takes time to like collect information, order title, things like that. And you want to be at a point where, in essence, you're on the phone, you're selling the deal, you're potentially looking at the property, and you're like, cool, this is what we can do. Great. You want to move forward? Let's go. And then you hand it off to, somebody, and they map everything based on what you want to do.
And I think you could streamline that by having your processing checklist, by detailing exactly what you're looking for in your title policies, what you're looking for in your insurance policies. And I'm working on templating out emails to where as soon as a deal gets go, I know what I'm sending to the insurance company that of the kind of insurance I need, to the title company, to where it's really kind of also almost systemized. And that's why I think it's really important to have like kind of your vanilla structure of the kind of loan you do and the kind of, the fees you charge, the interest you charge. I made the mistake early on of every loan not being exactly the same and kind of customizable. And not that you can't pivot here and there, but like you got to have your standard. And I feel really good and in a good place right now because I feel like I finally have my standard. And now, all right, if there's a specific deal I want to pivot a little bit, okay. But for the most part, this is what we fund. This is what we do. This is our system. And it's kind of plug and play, and it streamlines the whole process.
Yeah. The common trend that we have seen is you can get to about $5 million in a portfolio deployed ongoing and have everything customized, and then after that, it doesn't work. You got to make it more of a widget. You got to make everything kind of the same. That's because here's the thing. There's always going to be some sort of custom structure, like, maybe a reduced or a longer prepayment penalty, a property type that's different, maybe higher or lower terms here and there. So like you almost got to keep everything as consistent as possible. And what else and I don't know if you have or not, but like one of the things I've learned is first off, I don't want to use brain power on that. And second off, I don't want to have to negotiate with people on terms. If I only have one term, it makes my life a lot easier because some of these guys are better negotiators than I am anyways. And I don't know. I don't want to have to go on, a race to the bottom of like, cool, I'm just going to give you the highest leverage and the lowest, the lowest terms. Like that's what an institutional back lender can do. I'm not trying to do that. This is what we do. In essence, take it or leave it, right? Like there's obviously, relationship and selling, but that in essence what it is. And, if someone pushes and pushes and pushes and pushes, and they finally realize like, okay, this is what it is. And sometimes I win that deal. Sometimes I don't win that deal. But the good news is when I lose that deal, they go to an institutional back lender. And then finally they're at a point where they're like, I can't deal with this institutional back lender anymore, or they can't close on time. They're going to come to me. And then bam, easy sold deal at the terms I want.
One of my biggest pitching points is, a borrower who's had a bad experience with a larger firm. And it's like, look, I'm going to be a little more expensive, but you're not going to have to deal with that with me. Or you thought that was going to be cheaper, but with some of the issues you ran into, or like how we were talking about draws, that took longer, or they backed out of a deal and you lost the deal, what have you, like, you spend a little more and you don't have to worry about that. So I think that's one of the biggest pitching points I've had so far.
So the thing that helped our industry, I'm talking about like actual private capital, not institutional capital, the most is actually when institutional capital came in this space, because then all the real estate investors would go to them first, and then we would get the stuff that had to close, not like subprime stuff, the stuff that couldn't get closed quick enough for one reason or the other. Over 50%, maybe even 75% of every loan that we do is because they went to an institutional lender and they can't get it closed quick enough, and they come to us, and we have a week to close it, or whatever, a few days. I mean, we'll close it in a day, but like a few days or a week to close it, or they don't want to go. And I mean, there's endless reasons, why that happens. The wholesale fee is too high, right? Yeah. And an institutional lender doesn't want to do something that the wholesale fee is too high. They need to close too quick. They can't get access to the property, right? Like I'll do deals. Like I did a deal a week ago where like somebody came to us and said, "Hey, do you have to do an appraisal?" I was like, "We try to do an inspection, but it's not always necessary. Depends on the situation." And they're like, "Well, I can't get an appraisal. It's occupied. I'm buying the property for $400,000. I have 200. I'll put down. I just need the extra 200. Can we waive the appraisal?" And I'm like, "Sure." So,
Right.
I sent my guy out there. I had him look around the windows just to see if anything was crazy, but I took the risk that the property didn't need a ton of damage. I would have done a loan of 260 or, maybe even more, probably even more. That was, 300, anyways. So it's like, sure, I'll take it. But those are things that like an institutional capital source can't overcome. As a private lender, we can. And it's hard to teach and train somebody, a newer real estate investor, on that, but it's a long game, right? You do it, and then they'll know for the next one, and you'll get that deal.
And they see how easy it is to work with. So, that's kind of what I'm hoping to do. The Arizona market is saturated with some bigger lenders. And it's like, I want to kind of take my portion of the market share by service. That's what it ultimately comes down to. Like, I'm going to provide a really good service. It might be a little more expensive, or maybe you could get a little cheaper, but you'll see in the end that what we can provide is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Tell us about the book, your new book, Real Estate Side Hustle, and how that book started, why you wanted to even get into writing a book like that.
Yeah, so it's pretty much how you can have a full-time career and still invest passively in real estate. And, that's what I did while I was playing in the NFL. So some of the main pillars are how to buy single family and smaller multifamily, how to get into syndication investments, how to do private lending. And then the last pillar is triple net lease. And if you want to start to 1031 into bigger projects. And I found that those 4 pillars, you can do it off a limited time. You just have to build out the right SOPs, put the right team together, and you can invest passively. And knowing which strings to pull based on what your goals are and where you are in your career. So, being in real estate for the last decade, there wasn't a lot of books that really targeted this lane. And that's what most people are in. Most people don't necessarily want to get into real estate full time, but they're like, how can I invest? How can I grow a portfolio? And I think it's more possible than people realize. And I think this is the book that's going to kind of give people the framework of how to do it if you're a busy professional. So I'm super passionate about it. And within that, that's why the private lending is one of my main focuses now, because I think it's a very good pillar for when you're transitioning out of your career. Okay, how do I start to replace some of that income? Well, private lending is a great source. I don't think it's the end all be all. As you know, you're going to have to pay taxes on it. So, there's tax hits. But for me, I love balancing that with my real estate portfolio of properties. And I think that's a great balance.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can attest to that. There's so many private lenders in our group and our atmosphere that are in the same situation where, they have their regular jobs that they like, and, they want to figure out just ways to responsibly deploy their own money. Like it makes like private lending is a good sector that, again, has been around forever, but it's only really became like absorbable where people, think that, can do it themselves probably over the last 10 or 15 years.
Well, what's interesting, and you probably know this better than me, but when I started reading a lot of books on this, they call it different stuff, but like I read a Tony Robbins book, and he's talking about private credit, they call it, but it's the same exact concept, and how a lot of even billionaires, they have a good portion of their portfolio in private credit, private debt. Like it has all these different names, but it's essentially what both of our businesses do. And that was really kind of encouraging to where it's like, wow, so wealthy people, they really are investing in these same type of vehicles because they found, oh, venture capital is great, private equity is great, real estate's great, but they're not always cash flow generating, income producing vehicles, and private credit, private debt, private lending, whatever you want to call it is. So I think that's interesting and something people should take note of.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it was in Money Mastering the Game book that Tony Robbins said that. It was one of his books. I 100%. I was like, oh shit, Tony's investing in hard money loans too. And then, I listened to like a lot of Alex Hormozy podcasts and his stuff. And he did the same thing. He was lending a few $1 million out to a few borrowers.
Well, because it makes when you really think about it, it makes sense because they're making a ton of money in venture, or they're investing in these private equity and stuff like that. But those don't pay for a while. Like, oh, you might 100x, but it's going to take a decade. Well, you got to keep the lights on and you got to sustain your lifestyle and grow in the meantime. So once I started reading that, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah. They have this portfolio, but private debt kind of solves their cash issue.
Yeah, and even though the business has been around for so long, like it's become readily available to a lot more people now than it did in the past. Just because like it's deal flow, right? The name of this game is finding good deals. And like we didn't know anything related to this space at all at the beginning when we started. The only thing we knew about was like, let's go find freaking good deals. Because if we find a good deal, there's no way in hell that a capital investor isn't going to fund these deals because we needed capital back then. So that was the transition. Like we learned that from like going to, a few rich people that we didn't know many, and say, hey, what do you think of this investment? They're like, yeah, it sounds like a home run. Go find me deals that meet this mold and I'm happy to lend on them. Right. And that's what it was. We're like, really? It's that easy? And yeah, I mean, it's not that easy, right? Like there's a lot of work that goes into building a business and doing all that. But like, it went back to like, okay, cool. Let's go find lots of deals. And then we realized it's like, well, a lot of deals I thought were going to be easy to find weren't as easy. And, I'm going to have to do real work to find these really, really good deals. So
I think finding a distinct advantage is really important in this business. Like for me, I don't know if you agree with me because I go a little higher than you guys do, but I go up to 75% ARV. But why I feel comfortable is I'm an investor myself here locally. My wife is an agent. I have a couple of really good relationships with contractors. It's a non-judicial foreclosure state. So there's these reasons to where I don't want to deal with the default or foreclosure, hopefully ever, but realistically speaking, it's going to happen. But I feel like I'm poised and in position to really take advantage of that situation to where I'm willing to go a little higher than what you would consider comfortable. But I feel I have a distinct advantage in this market to be able to do so. So, other private lenders or hard money lenders out there, consider that if you have an advantage in some way, how can you get more deal flow and lean into that a little bit? And, that's one thing. Another thing that's kind of helped me get more deal flow early on in Arizona is like, okay, I'm willing to go to 75% ARV because I'm very confident in our comping and our BPOs because, my wife is really good at that. And I'm having my
I don't know if you lost me or lost you on that internet stuff, but sorry. But yeah, so I agree with you on that. And one of the things to add is if your average ARV is $400,000 and you're lending 75%, you're lending $300,000, right? So you have $100,000 equity cushion, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're in a market where you have a $200,000, median housing price ARV and you're lending 65%, that's $130,000, right? So you only have $70,000 in equity cushion. So again, some of the things you have to take in consideration in this business is dollars and not just percentage.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a really good point because if if you're only lending 65 or 50%, like people are coming with a lot more money in Arizona and you're shortening your pool because if they got to come with $200,000-$300,000, like not everyone has that, but they might be a good investor. So I think that's a great point. For sure.
Like that's a real thing to look at. Like, hey, if you're lending on the guy's buying it for $80,000, he says he doesn't need much. It doesn't need much construction, and he'll put down like 40%. It's like, yeah, but that's not all that much money, right?
Yeah.
That's a good percentage, but it's not money. It's the same thing with charging minimum fees, right? Like people will be like, oh, well, I'm charging 5 points, and it's like, well, if you're doing a $50,000 deal and charging 5 points, you're making $2,500. What do you do? Like, if you're in a state that you're able to charge, what you want. Like charge, to make it worth your while. So dollar figure instead of percentage makes a lot of, makes a lot of sense to look into. Devon, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on. So where can everybody find this book that wants to buy it? I full transparency, I don't own this book, but I actually, am into it. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Like I'm definitely going to pick it up myself. I think, or I'll pick up the audiobook because I don't typically physical.
I do audiobooks too.
I typically can bang through an audiobook a week. In the morning when I walk and stuff like that, like that's what works for me. And I usually, so I usually just have an ongoing list, but it's definitely, sparked my curiosity to check that out. So where can people find that book if they want to buy it?
Yeah, buy it on Amazon or anywhere you order books. Pretty much there, it's everywhere. And you could also head to my website, devonkennard.com. And then my lending company website is weare42solutions.com. So if you're in Arizona looking for loans, reach out to me there. Or if you're interested in investing, you could always do that as well. So yeah, thanks for having me, Jason. I appreciate it. And man, it's been a pleasure learning from you so far.
Yeah, no, likewise, right? It's, one of the best parts about kind of being in a circle of like-minded people is it doesn't really matter background, experience level. Everybody's different, right? Everyone's got different values to bring. I mean, that's the whole value of a mastermind, group in general, and, networking with people makes a lot of sense. Yeah, definitely check out Real Estate Side Hustle, Devon's book. Also, like he said, We Are 42 Solutions. If you're in Arizona and you're looking for a loan, that's great. Maybe you're listening to this or watching this and you're a broker and you might have an opportunity there. Feel free to reach out to them, or just if you're another private lender and you're trying to learn the industry. I know you've reached out to a few other lenders, in our circle as well, in different markets, right? Different people are in different spots, and, it's good that everybody can share their experiences and, kind of have one cohesive thing, because, we're all trying to help each other, and nobody, God forbid, wants to lose any money in this space. But if anyone has shortcuts to help each other, it's definitely a beautiful thing, because there's just not all that much knowledge in this, in this type of business.
Absolutely.
All right, man. I certainly appreciate it. And we'll be in touch. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.